one to this series of exploring the philosophy of objectivism from different perspectives. And today we're going to talk about science, religion, and philosophy. Here with me, thank you for being here, is Robert Mayhew. I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion because one of the goals is introducing people who have never heard about objectivism, but we all struggle with questioning things in our lives, right? Sometimes we grow up, I, myself included, I was raised up as a Catholic and practicing Catholicism and different religions. Some people even believe that without religion there would be no moral, or that without religion there would be no philosophy, right? So I want to ask you, in your personal journey going through life, how did you end up finding in the philosophy of objectivism, the answers that you were looking for? And Robert, in your case, for instance, when you were, finding your way to have different answers to questions, why do you think some people think that without religion there will be no moral or no philosophy? And where does this come from? Is religion philosophy? What is religion?
Well, that's a lot of questions. To get to the first of it, I think most people think that without religion there won't be morals because they've never been given an alternative. They've been presented in their lives. They've been raised with the idea that they've been raised religious, and they have the idea that that's where morality comes from. So that the alternative becomes either you're religious and have a set of moral principles, you believe that there are moral absolutes, or you reject that. Let's say you come to find religion irrational, you reject it, and so the alternative is going to be subjectivism, or it's moral relativism. Every culture, every person has their own views, but it's just a bunch of feelings and opinions. There are no moral absolutes. And for a lot of people, and for good reason, that alternative is pretty scary, or it has obnoxious or worse consequences, so they stick with religion. But they don't know that there's an alternative. Or they might find an alternative in a political, in socialism or something like that.
What about you? Did you ever thought that religion was, the core of morality?
Well, I was raised Catholic as well. I don't know if it was lukewarm Catholicism, and in high school I decided, I really don't take this seriously. Maybe I ought to. So I did what most Catholics don't do. I read the Bible.
Yeah, there you go.
And it was around that time that I also started reading Ayn Rand, and so it wasn't simply that I had all these questions to which I thought there were no answers. I thought there were real problems with Christianity. And at the same time, I was learning by reading the Fountainhead, for example, that there wasn't only one thing called morality. There was religious morality, and it had a base that I thought was certainly, it was disintegrating as I pursued it. And then there was this alternative that had a radically different conception of ethics that seemed to make a lot of sense to me. I didn't have the philosophy, I didn't have the equipment to establish that this was right, but it sounded good. And that's kind of, so the already lukewarm Catholicism, when put to the test, disappeared. And in its place, I gradually spent a lot of time studying this alternative I'd found, and it worked out. And to my mind, it has now a really solid basis that did not require the supernatural or an act of faith, what have you.
Now, is it to blame humanity, or it was just an evolutionary process? Because of course, at first, we didn't have science, right? The first caveman, the first Homo sapiens in the planet, they didn't have any explanation of why sometimes it rained, or sometimes you had lightning, or droughts. So evidently, myths and these dogmas and the invention of gods was like the logical thing to draw upon. But then 300 years now we're living in a new side of the spectrum where we have science, and science is not punished anymore, right? Because Galileo and so many scientists and people who try to come up with rational explanations to things that for centuries were seen as the explanation is in the skies or the gods are mad. Now we have science, and still people reject it. And some people think, especially in Latin America, that by me saying, I'm an atheist, and everyone is an atheist. Everyone is an atheist of all the gods except theirs, right? Everyone is an atheist of Zeus, or Quetzalcoatl, of Mitra, of any god except theirs, because of course that's the right god. So why is it so hard still for science to be something accepted in a world where it's evident that we now have explanation? I mean, the cavemen, the first Homo sapiens, they didn't have the alternative. We have it, but still some people refuse even to accept evolution.
I think you make a good distinction. I think there's a difference between the religiosity, if you want to call it that, of the early man. And I think the fact that they immediately created stories to explain the world illustrates Ayn Rand's, the point she makes that human beings require, whether they admit it or not or like it or not, they require a set of fundamental beliefs. We don't emerge in the world hardwired with instincts and such that all we need is whatever is equipment we have plus sense perception. We're not animals in that, we're not perceptual animals. We need a set of ideas to navigate through the world that we find ourselves. And this becomes, she elaborates on this in Philosophy Who Needs It. But you're right, you can't emerge from the cave and just invent a set of beliefs about rational beliefs about the fundamental nature of reality and the human mind's ability to grasp it and how we should live and organize society. So they invented stuff. As you put it, they wanted to thank someone for the rain that made the crops grow, and lightning strikes a tree, and that seems powerful. There must be some cause of that. So they invented these stories, and I think that's where religion comes from, or myths, or whatever you want to have it. And so you really can't fault that, but that the emergence of these ideas. But you're right that in the 21st century or the 16th, or that people are still religious. I think that that goes back to our earlier question. Ayn Rand once wrote, and I found it very puzzling when I first saw it, that if it weren't for the ethics of altruism, she said mysticism and religion would have disappeared ages ago. And it's the sense that it's become ingrained in the culture that this is what ethics is. It's an altruistic ethics. That is morality. And, well, you're not going to get a good scientific basis for that, so we cling on to these religions. And even people like, who I have respect in some respects, Richard Dawkins, he's been very good, I think, about challenging religion. But he wrote an essay called Atheists for Jesus. And he defends he says, isn't it wonderful, the idea that we should love our enemies? And it's too bad that we don't have arguments to support it. Maybe one day we will have arguments. But so clearly he's accepting that's what ethics is, and he doesn't want to give up ethics because that's problematic.
Sometimes humanity, and this is something that Carl Sagan talks about, the burning of the Library of Alexandria. How a lot of knowledge that humanity lost, and it draws us back centuries in which we could have advanced a lot in science, and we just couldn't because it was burned. So not only science is hard, but you persecute people who do it, you threaten their lives, you are chasing them constantly. So let me ask you, does religion, and I understand this like altruistic motives that sustain it, but is it fate that sustains religion, or is it politics and political power? Has religion gotten all the way to the 21st century only because people need to believe in something and because they have faith? Or is it because the religion is also something that politicians, emperors, conquistadors have used in order to perpetuate their power? Like, is it a mix of the two?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, one reason where I think Islam is more dangerous than Christianity in the 21st century is that Christianity was defanged. in effect. For the most part, in the West, I mean, there are certainly exceptions, and there are people, Christians everywhere who want to turn things around. But it had its teeth removed. It had its political power broken in the Enlightenment. And yet people, and that's why in many ways you meet people who are perfectly decent. They go to church on Sunday, but they're computer scientists or whatever. Yeah. It's become more of a private matter, and it has no political power. And yet it's there in the culture. It is people cling to it, and I think for reasons we've said before. Whereas, the whole Arab conquest of that part of the world, the destruction of the Byzantine Empire, that was all, that was religion combined with politics, with political power. And whenever you have that, it's a disaster. It's where the Galileos, the Socrates, as you put it, although that was in some ways a milder example of church and state or religion in politics. But when the two are mixed, it's a real problem. One thing I think that makes that allowed, because it's not just that people are forced to be religious. I think a lot of, there's a spiral there, a vicious circle in a way. People who are religious want that out of an authority. They want a political figure with a lot of power to support their views. And Ayn Rand had, I thought, this very perceptive psychological remark. She says something to the effect that the mystic is the person who, in confrontation with other people, they, how does she put it? They, in the choice between I know and they say, they accept the latter. It's choosing other people over your own mind and its grasp of reality. And I think that too, psychologically, in an individual goes hand in hand with political authority. There are people who, they have these views. At some level, they have to know that it's not rationally supported. And what support do they want instead? Well, they want a political leader who can force those views or protect them or what have you.
Now, we understand that reason and science is a method to, understand what's going on in reality using reason as the primary tool of observation, experimentation. Then you draw conclusions, hypotheses. You can clearly see what is reason, what is science. Now, what is faith? Does such thing as faith exist, or is only something that shamans and priests say, oh, you just need to have a little bit more faith? And the people who don't believe, they're like disconnected from their faith, right? I remember whenever I asked questions in my Catholic school, they were like you need to tune down a little bit your reason and like put up a little bit your faith. And I'm like, well, where do I find my faith? Where is the faith? And I remember there's a documentary that Morgan Freeman did, and he's an atheist, right? But he did this documentary about God, and he goes all around the world asking different religious leaders, like, what do they think? And they do this CT scan to people. Some of them are believers and some of them are not. And they are examining in the brain when they say, okay, think of God, and some parts of the frontal cortex will lighten up in the people who are religious, and in the people who are atheists, they just don't. So is this like wired in us, the belief that like some people are more, wired to have faith or some not, or what's going on there? First
part of your question, you ask, does faith exist and what is it? Right. Does it exist? Yes, alas, in large amounts. Faith is, now sometimes people equivocate, their faith is like, you can use it to mean confident, I have faith in you, son. But epistemologically, faith is a conscious acceptance of a belief or beliefs in the absence of sensory evidence and reasoning, or in the absence of, or even in defiance of, because there are some thinkers like Tertullian, reason tells you one thing, faith is the opposite. You go with faith, and a lot of the early religions are like that. So, that's what faith is. And now, in order to justify it, Oscar Wilde once wrote that faith begins in skepticism, and I think that's a very good point. Every defender of faith has tried to argue that there are limits to reason. Reason can't know everything, and yet we need to know these important things about the supernatural, whatever, so that justifies faith. And they take this view that, and I think it's a very modern one, and it's all the major Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, have had major thinkers who have argued for the the harmony of reason and faith. You have Averroes, Thomas Aquinas, Maimonides, and what they try to do is say, yeah, reason's really important, and it should do what it needs to do in the terrestrial realm in a way. But we also have all these beliefs that reason can't tell us, these questions reason can't answer, and so we need faith for that. But it really doesn't work that way. Ayn Rand once had this, I think it's a great metaphor. She says, that shortcut to knowledge, what you call faith, is a short circuit destroying the mind, or destroying the mind, or something like that. And it is true. I think the mind doesn't work that way. If you consciously think it's okay to believe things without evidence, ultimately, to the extent that you practice that, it's going to have really negative consequences in your life. And you're not going to be able to just keep it on church on Sunday. It's going to affect, that's where irrationality comes from in large part. And it's going to have a bad effect on the culture too. And I think it's also going to affect, people can, for example, they have that mindset, that psychoepistemology is the term she uses, and they might reject religion, but they're going to replace it with something else that is equally unsupported by reason, like socialism or something like that. So.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you that because sometimes religious people, when you publish in social media or you say somewhere that you don't believe in any God, it's like, oh, you're attacking my faith. Don't do that. I feel criticized. I feel offended, and it seems to me that when someone presents themselves as I'm an atheist and I think that there are better philosophies than religions and things like that. They like it because that makes them question the things that they don't want to question. It's not what you believe. It's that by you saying so, you are making them doubt. Like you're putting them doubts that they don't want to have. Because it's scary, right? I remember that when I left Catholicism, and I left it by studying history. When I started seeing, oh my God, this was a political scheme. This was the Roman Empire. They couldn't keep up anymore with, all these gods. And they were like, okay, now Christianity is the new fashion. Oh, okay, let's then change it, right? It was like, let's listen to democracy. And I went to my dad and I was like, Dad, I'm sorry, but I cannot be part of this institution. It's anti-science, anti-women, anti-reason. It is, to blame for a lot of kids' sexual assaults and all these horrible crimes, right? And religious people tell you, but they also, they cure people with cancer and they take care of the poor and they take care of the orphans. So it's like, if you do good things, what does it matter? All the bad things that religions have done. But you wouldn't do that with a political party, right? You don't support a political party that has some corruption just because they also do some goods. But it seems to me that with people, when it comes to religion, it's like, we can skip the bad parts. Still, there are good parts because it's scary. It's like, how do you replace the mentality that this is the absolute truth with something that will give you a bunch of doubts and a bunch of uncertainties?
It's tragic because the result of it is, and I see this in my students, it's the most important questions about what kind of world do I live in? What is it to be a human being? What should I do with my life? Is happiness a proper goal? All those questions are left outside the province of reason. I'm not supposed to think of those. Those come prepackaged from my parents or from someplace else. And so they might be very rational in other fields, in their career or what have you, but these really crucial questions, it's as if I'm not going to pursue those with my own mind and come to conclusions that I think are really satisfactory. No, it's they accept from outside just a prepackaged set of beliefs that are really quite strange if you pursue them.
And the way to shut that down is that they say to you, no, you are the arrogant because you reject that there's a God. How dare you? How do you think that you have all the answers in the universe as to know that my God is not real, right? And I like a quote of Carl Sagan about that he said about humbleness. And he said, who is more humble? I'm paraphrasing, it's not his exact words, but like the intention was, who is more humble? A person that tells you that in one book there's all the truths, although it's not one book, it's like 70 something books, and there's like 1,000 years from difference from the oldest to the newest, and they were not supposed to be packaged together as the absolute truth. Do you think that person is more humble? Or the scientist, or the little kid who looks at the sky in wonder of all the things that the universe can teach, and accept those truths, those realities as they come, with no previous beliefs? Well, for me, definitely it is more arrogant to say, this is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Everything has been thought for you, you don't have to think anymore. But still, when you ask the majority, atheists seem to be, the arrogance.
I think there's something to what he's saying, but I would not use the concepts he does. He's taking a Christian virtue, humility, and trying to use it against the religious person, and he does that because at some level Sagan is a skeptic, or he sees skepticism as part of what the scientific method is. It's challenge, it's not knowing all the answers. But in fact, I think an independent person should be proud of their knowledge and in their confidence in the efficacy of the mind, and not be humble, because it's humility that leads people. It's you could call it epistemological humility that leads people to embrace a religion, because they can accept the set of beliefs and they don't have to worry about arguments and thinking about it. So there is certainly the religious leaders and the people who are really in your face pro-religion. You could say that doesn't quite fit Jesus's conception of humility, but I don't think that's a very fundamental criticism to make of the religious people.
Once you go to this path of finding your own answers and you get scared, there are two things that could accelerate this process for humanity, and I don't know what are you gonna think about this. There's a great comedy movie called Paul. It's about this alien that was kidnapped by the FBI and the CIA during the Roswell landing, and they have done all the experiments to the alien that they can think of. Now it's time to finally kill him and examine his brain. So the alien is like, no, I am not gonna do that, and he escapes. When he escapes, he finds these two British guys that are doing a road trip in America.
I haven't seen this movie.
It's an amazing movie. It's a funny comedy, right? But they go all over the United States through the Route 66, and they end up in what you guys call the Bible Belt, right? Mm-hmm. And there's this girl, and she has been, brought up super fundamentally Christian, and she believes, she even has a T-shirt that Jesus will save us and all of that. And Paul is in the toilet, so they're having a conversation, but she's not looking at him, right? And he speaks like a normal human being, English, right? And she's like, no, because Jesus created us all equal and this and that, and he's like, what about the rest of the universe? No, there's nothing in the rest of the universe. We are the only thing that exists in this planet. And he's like, and what about evolution? No, evolution doesn't exist. And then he opens the door, right? And he's like, so how do you explain me? And she just faints. She faints and drops to the floor, because it's in 1 second, all her beliefs are crushed down, right? Because how do you explain a different form of life from another planet that doesn't collide with what you've been taught all your life? So do you believe, and I know that this is not in the realm of philosophy or science, but in the realm more of science fiction, but for the purpose of entertaining the ideas that we sometimes have when we are finding our ways, do you believe that if we would encounter a different form of life and we could contrast it with humanity, that would be the end of religions?
I don't think so, because that would presume that there's some kind of argument or evidence out there that could dissuade the religious person. But I think what faith does, it provides a buffer between you and reality in a way. It's, I mean, there's this brilliant quote in Galt's speech about, which I don't remember the word for, but it's, you know, all of these things you people come up with, the religions and stuff, it's, the whole purpose ultimately is to replace the it is with the I wish. And if a person's faith is strong enough, what they would do is they would try to, there would be certain passages in the Bible or the Quran where we can account, oh, so that's what he's referring to. The aliens. I thought it was just about the earth, but really Christianity includes, you know, Solar 7 or whatever that planet they came from. So
that's not in the Bible, so how do you justify?
What's in the Bible?
That's right.
I've studied a lot of, I've studied a lot of the early Christian philosophers. Those are the first philosophers who attempted to explain Christianity. And there were all kinds of battles because the Bible doesn't really say a lot and about a lot of the details. And on every major issue, the least common sense conclusion was the one that ultimately became orthodox. Because the orthodox Christianity wasn't really established until the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century or something like that.
Right.
So take one example was, what is the nature of Jesus? Well, there are passages that say that, you know, Jesus was a human being, right? And then he was adopted by God and he became a special divine being. There are other passages that suggest that God is divine, that he's actually, that Jesus is godlike somehow. So you had these schools of thought. He's a human being. No, he's not a human being. That's purely an illusion. He's actually a God, but it has to be one or the other. What was, when the dust settled, what was the orthodox view? God is simultaneously fully human and fully divine. How do you explain that rationally? You know, Shut Up, My Father Explained. That was the title of a book that I think, and that I think is it. It becomes, and that's where the politics comes in. Yeah, I believe it because it's absurd. That was Tertullian saying. That shows how strong my faith is. That my faith is so strong that I accept what flies in the face of reason. He was talking about the resurrection, and he says, I believe it because it's impossible. I accept it because it is true because it's absurd, or something along those lines. And you can't answer that. Aliens are not going to dislodge that belief from that kind of mind.
I didn't want that answer.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're hoping for the alien invasion
Every day I'm like, please come. So, all religions play with another life, right? The transcendence of the soul. And in fact, for example, one thing that I also blame Catholicism for the poverty in Latin America is that being poor is a virtue, right? The poorer you are on earth, the bigger your house in heaven is going to be. The sicker you are, the more miserable you are in this earth. Don't worry, God will compensate you on the afterlife. Whereas the rich, the productive, no, those guys are bad, right? That's one thing that I don't like about Catholicism, and it's deeply enrooted, especially in Latin America. I don't see it that much in the Anglo-Saxon world. But the promise of a transcendence, right? Even the Muslims, right? They promise you, I don't know how many virgins, if you sacrifice for the religion. It's always the promise that things will be better after we die. And because no one comes out of, from the afterlife back here to tell us, like, what's the real religion, because I wish also that someone would come back and say, you know what, guys, actually, Zeus is the right God. The rest of the gods, no, those were not the right ones, right? I wish that would happen. I don't think it's going to happen. But now there are people questioning that we're not going to die anymore, right? The promise of eternal youth. And here I have a book, it's in Spanish, La Muerte de la Muerte, which means the death of death. And it's written by David Wood and Jose Luis Cordeiro. And it plays around with the scientific possibility or approximation that we're going to be able to, stop the aging process, cryotherapy, DNA, all these kinds of findings. And okay, maybe we won't live forever, but let's say we start living 200 years or 150 years or just more time. Do you think religions will still have a business when the afterlife is not that near anymore. Like it's something that you can push further on.
I think it's similar to the alien question that.
Come on,
No. In the sense that there's a really big difference between rational attempts to extend one's life. I mean, that's a wonderful thing, which only science can do, and the promise of an afterlife that that's beyond this world. Now, there's a number of questions there. There's the question of the immortality of the soul, right, and the promise of an afterlife, and isn't that a good thing for the poor and all that? But in fact, it really destroys the value of this world and living life now and seeking value in the world here on earth. I found it interesting when I discovered that Ayn Rand, she became an atheist at the age of 13 or something like that. And she said the reason was not because the arguments were bad, I mean, that must have been part of it, but that it put value in another realm. Happiness, after your life. And so this world becomes grossly impoverished because you're supposed to accept your plight as a poor person or a sick person, and you get special credit if you devote your life to the poor or to like Mother Teresa and the sick of Calcutta. You don't get extra credit if you actually create a political system or produce wealth that lifts people out of poverty, that cures disease. No, that doesn't get you any awards in heaven.
So how do we do this? Because it seems that in the surface, we're offering people a really bad deal. It's like, you know what? Take your religion out, take reason. No, there's no afterlife. You're gonna have to find everything by yourself. And yeah, it's all about hard work. You know, if you contrast it with what we're competing at, which is you're gonna live forever, there's a God that is always, looking after you. It seems like a hard task, right? But why is it that a rational philosophy, even though in the surface might sound not as a good deal as a religion, is always better than any religion?
It's sad that people, their view of life is that I might hit the jackpot and achieve really great things in heaven afterwards. It says something about their view of themselves in this world now. And I have a coffee mug at my office at work, and it's a Far Side comic. And you see an angel sitting on a cloud. Wish I brought a magazine. And so I think heaven would be a crushing bore. Yeah. I mean, you can invent fantasies. Oh, I could talk to Aristotle, and I bet the library is really good or something like that. But why should we, if that's what you're doing, if you're placing all your ideals and your values, and I can talk to dead relatives for people who want to talk to their relatives. It's really, I think psychologically, it's a terrible motive. And I think for people who they don't want to lose religion because they lose that, then you have a lot of work to do to convince them that no, this is where it is. A rich, happy life should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you want to fill it with the values. You want to find a career and a romantic partner, and that has a certain finite duration. The idea of 800 years. I mean, at a certain point, you're going to get tired writing books or whatever it is you do, and honey, I love you, but it's been 800 years. It's time for something. It seems to make no sense.
So, by knowing all this, and knowing it's a hard task because at the end it depends on oneself. What about being religious and objectivist? Let's say that someone in the audience is watching this and saying, this philosophy sounds interesting, but I'm not just ready to quit my religion, whatever that religion is. Can you be objectivist and religious at the same time? Does such thing exist? Like the blue pill or the red pill? What do you want to take?
Truth or falsehood.
Yeah.
And in the end, I think there's too much emphasis. I wouldn't put any emphasis on calling oneself an objectivist, but at the end of the day, there's too much because if you're genuinely religious, you're accepting a metaphysics that contradicts the view of reality that contradicts objectivism's view you're accepting faith, which flies in the face of objectivist epistemology. If your religion, if you've jettisoned your altruism or whatever, that I don't know what is left of ethical import in your religion, then I guess you'd be better off doing that. But if you accept any of the Christian ethics or the Muslim ethics or whatever, then yeah, that's going to fly in the face with objectivism too. So it's really trying to have your cake and eat it too, or to accept a contradiction, and that really flies in the face of objectivism.
So where do you recommend to start? If some people in the audience are like, I'm interested, where would you start?
Above all, I would say read the novels and read it with an active mind. Don't go in, because I think that there are people who I think start religious and they take that whole model and apply it to objectivism.
Yes.
They don't know anything about the philosophy, but they like being part of a group, and so they call themselves objectivists. But it has the same status in their minds. I've been going to conferences since '83, and there are far, far fewer of those people. I rarely encounter them anymore at these conferences, but you used to more in the old days. Read the novels, and Ayn Rand makes a contrast between an active mind and an open mind. An open mind is it's a wide open mind anyway. Everything spills out. But ask questions and say, what do you think of this character, his approach to life, and then take the same attitude towards your own opinion. Be a good, honest introspector. Ask, why am I holding on to this belief? Is it because I have good reasons for it? What are my motives? And then the novels are good. And then after that, I would say I've edited a collection of essays on.
You're already leaving homework.
And then I have essays on Ayn Rand's, each one of her literary works. Yeah. And I would say, particularly for Latin America, read. I think the place to start is the Fountainhead for especially a young person. Yeah. But We the Living, I think, would really resonate with Latin America. I think that might be a novel that reads, to the extent that I understand Latin American.
Yeah, no, I started Rand with Atlas Shrugged. I studied in a very free market university in Guatemala called UFM, and the founder started with "You Wanna Read?" I Pencil. That got him into Austrian economics with Hayek, with Mises, and then of course Rand. So my university is like this ecosystem where all the pro-capitalist ideas collide, right? And there was always the book club of Ayn Rand, but until I graduated, I studied political science and international affairs. I went to rent the book from the library. I remember I read the first page. I didn't understand anything. I said my English is still bad, but in that moment I was like, no, this is no good. And I waited until living abroad and doing some internships and scholarships, and then I grabbed it again, and it hooked me. Especially because she explains so well cronyism, corruption, these entrepreneurs that are trying to struggle with people who are not entrepreneurs, who that they're not wealth creators, they're wealth destructors. And it resonated also a lot with the living, with the Latin American case. Yeah. And so finally, unless there's something else that you want to add, I first want to thank you very much for bearing with my questions. I know that some of them were a little bit off of what you normally would try to answer. I hope I see you again, probably, maybe in Latin America. Thank you, Robert. And thank you, all of you. And please share this content. We have a series where we're exploring objectivism with other members of the Ayn Rand Institute, and we're gonna talk about other subjects, but especially this. If you know friends that are questioning their religion or trying to find answers to a better path to philosophy, please share this in your social media. Look for the Ayn Rand Institute. They are on Facebook and Instagram, on Twitter, and also in my channels, Gloria Álvarez. You're gonna find this. Thank you very much.